Hello and welcome to State of Play on Mint Press News. I'm your host, Greg Stoker, and I'm coming to you from Chicago, where I'm hosting a Palestine benefit show tomorrow on the 4th of July called Anti-4th. So I'm forced to record from one of my buddies' rehearsal studios. And so we've got some decorations going on, which Mint Press News does not in any capacity endorse. But the news cycle has been racing along with its customary insanity. From Trump's big, beautiful bill, which will turn ICE into one of the most well-funded militaries on the planet. So that's fun, to this Gaza ceasefire smoke and mirrors deal. And that is what we are going to be focusing on in this episode, Palestine and other developments within the region. And to that end, we are joined by Robert Inlakesh, a political analyst, journalist, and documentary filmmaker. He has reported from and lived in the occupied Palestinian territories and has worked for RT, Middle East Eye, The New Arab, Memo, Mint Press News, Al Mayadeen, English, TRT World, and various other media outlets. Currently a staff writer at Mint Press News. Thanks so much for coming on to just do the regional roundtable.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, the news cycle is kind of insane. It's hard to keep up with it, both domestically and in terms of foreign policy, as the Iran drama continues to play out. And boy, do we have some things to discuss. We are apparently maybe going to send Israel its own set of B-2 bombers to strike Iran on our behalf. But anyways, so I guess we should begin this episode by addressing the bombshell Associated Press expose from yesterday about American military contractors, aka mercenaries. That's just the diluted language we use. They're mercenaries, firing upon Palestinians at aid distribution centers. If you're not tracking what's happening with the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, here's a brief Al Jazeera primer for what is going on, just to catch you guys up to speed.
The AP says the first of its kind video was leaked by 2 US contractors working at GHF sites. They say they've been disturbed by the dangerous and irresponsible practices they've seen. The contractors say bullets, stun grenades and pepper spray were used at nearly every distribution, even if there was no threat. One contractor said bullets were fired in all directions, at times towards hungry and desperate Palestinians. They also said security staff hired to work at the sites were often unqualified, unvetted, heavily armed, and appear to have an open license to do as they wish.
Hey, got IDF tank posted on the northwest corner.
One of the videos obtained by the AP shows what appear to be heavily armed security guards discussing how to clear nearby Palestinians.
Yeah, I think you hit one.
At least 15 gunshots can be heard. One contractor AP spoke to said security staff fired in the direction of Palestinians walking away from the aid distribution site. The AP says audio analysis of this video indicates the machine gun fire came from within 150 meters of the camera and the Palestinians who had come there desperate for food.
And of course, the IDF positions were further away than 150 meters from the aid distribution sites. So kind of insane. I talked about like this was bound to happen. It attracts a certain type of people. And just before I get your take on this, Robert, I just wanted to give some context. The Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, GHF, is an American organization based in Delaware, established in February of this year to distribute humanitarian aid during the ongoing genocide. Formerly led by Executive Director Jake Wood until his resignation on the 25th of May, it has the backing of the Trump administration and the Israeli government. It has been criticized by the United Nations and humanitarian groups for politicizing aid distribution, obviously, with well-established humanitarian groups saying the GHF is giving cover for Israel to pursue its aims to depopulate Palestinians from the Gaza Strip. And its former head, the guy Jake Woods, a former Marine sniper, resigned, questioning the group's impartiality and neutrality upon his resignation. And it's now run by Johnny Moore, an American evangelical leader and businessman who founded the Kairos Company, a public relations firm. He's a commissioner for the United States Commission on International Religious Freedom and co-founder and president of the Congress of Christian Leaders. In June 2025, he was appointed the executive chairman of the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. And yes, he has attended prayer meetings in the White House, of course. Before we expand to the wider region, I like, in your estimation, and we've talked about this before on the show, what is the purpose of U.S. contractors on the ground in Gaza?
Well, them personally, they're obviously making a buck out of it, and it's something for them to do. So the private military contractors themselves are motivated by money, and perhaps maybe some of them bloodlust as well, as we've seen demonstrated in that video. But the organization itself was an Israeli project. It's been admitted as such in the Israeli Knesset. And Lieberman and others have openly said that this is a project that was funded by the Israelis to begin with. And of course, the whole point of this was to collapse UNRWA, which is the UN agency for dealing with Palestinian refugees, which also happens to register Palestinian refugees. The Israelis banned it. They released this fraudulent document with various claims about UNRWA, and then have made other claims since, which they've never proven. And when these documents were assessed by the media, ultimately they were shown to be presenting information with no proof for their claims. So they wanted to destroy UNRWA, which registers Palestinian refugees. So on one hand, you get out of the whole right of return, because if you can disband UNRWA, then there's nobody registering the refugees, so you don't have a refugee population anymore. And then, of course, they wanted to control the influx of aid into the Gaza Strip, both for the Israeli domestic audience that opposes a vast portion of the Israeli population, which opposes allowing such aid into the Gaza Strip, and then also as well for the wider plans of their genocide, their war, which ultimately is ethnically cleansing the population, of course, which they've proven incapable of doing so far. But by eliminating hundreds and thousands of different aid points and sites and the distribution methods, which were carried out by genuine humanitarian organizations, they've essentially controlled it. And then on top of that as well, another thing that it's opened the door for is this militia group, which is led by a man named Yasser Abu Shabab. This militia group has links to ISIS. This is something that has been openly admitted by the Israelis. Again, even Netanyahu acknowledged this, where these thugs, criminals, drug traffickers, and hardline Salafists who have links to not only ISIS, but Al-Qaeda, the Al-Qaeda affiliates, which Hamas was fighting during its rule in the Gaza Strip, and were looting aid before, are now equipped with Israeli weapons, tactical vests, helmets, and are presented as a grassroots resistance to Hamas, essentially so that they can do the dirty work of the Israeli military that doesn't want to go and do certain operations on the ground because of how costly it is to their soldiers. And then, of course, as well, they've participated in securing the aid transfers. So it all ties into this. This is a dirty game. It's making revenue for these contractors at the very least, privatizing food distribution during a genocide. And over 600 people have been killed by Israeli forces, and I suspect some of them by the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation's private military contractors as well. So this is a very, very dirty tactic. And there's a reason why the United Nations would never get behind it, why around 160 NGOs have condemned it, because it's a death trap. Just the other day, a member of my wife's family went to go and collect aid, and he was shot dead by the Israelis. At least we think the bullets came from the Israelis. So this is happening every single day. The Israelis are luring Palestinians towards small amounts of food that they can collect, so that they can essentially pick them off and shoot them and kill them, like it's a sport, shooting fish in a barrel.
Yeah. So just to highlight, definitely say like, yes, the U.S. employs contractors heavily, especially for security operations. So like during the global war on terror in Iraq and Afghanistan, a lot of the base security was actually not done by soldiers and Marines. It was done by private military contractors. There's a lot of reasons for it. One of the biggest reasons under the capitalist economic system is it makes a few people a lot of money, and it's inextricably tied to the Israeli government, and it's inextricably tied to the evangelical core within the United States and the White House. So yeah, and of course Trump has been talking about, and this was happening under the Biden administration too, with Democratic officials as well, talking about privatizing security operations and aid distributions within the Gaza Strip, as you pointed out, to undercut UNRWA, which not only deals with Palestinians in Palestine, but also it's a connective tissue with the actual diaspora outside of Palestine as well. So they've been wanting to get rid of that forever. So if they can privatize aid, all the better. Yeah, so I think after this like groundbreaking expose, do you think it's going to change anything?
No, unfortunately I don't. We've had so many of these groundbreaking exposés on everything you could imagine, from Israel's rape dungeons at Satiman detention facility. Of course, we know that there was an infamous case of gang rape, and even there were portions of the Israeli right wing which protested in favor of the right to gang rape Palestinian prisoners who are taken without a charge. By the way, they call them Hamas terrorists, but these people are taken from Gaza without a charge, and they are put into these detention facilities, and there's mass sexual abuse. Not just to the males, the population in those detention facilities, but also the women. So I think that after everything we've seen, unfortunately, I don't think it's going to impact what Israel's policy is.
Or United States policy. You know, I anticipate them expanding the GHF program potentially. Or if it becomes too toxic, like politically, like Blackwater, they'll just rebrand. You know, Blackwater became Z, which then had another scandal in Africa, so they had to rebrand to Academy. And Academy actually is are the contractors who approached me after I was getting out of special operations. $300,000 to do sketchy stuff in the global South. I went to college instead, but I do know some people within the defense contracting world. And one of my friends, who's on the pro-Palestine spectrum, although complicated politics being a defense contractor in that, he applied for a GHF just to see what would happen. And he was a former Marine infantryman, but he said he didn't have the qualifications because he wasn't like in special operations when he was in the service. It's like, well, okay, I was in special operations. We have zero experience in any sort of humanitarian missions. So this is basically just thuggery, goon squad, terrorism that's privatized, in my opinion, and within more politically enlightened people within the defense circles as well. It won't change anything. It's obviously driven largely by ideology. You know, we've got the Israeli backing alongside the Christian evangelical core. So that's just going to continue. Just wanted to call that out and basically discuss what the purpose behind those contractors were. Now, moving on, we have another potential promise of a ceasefire in Gaza. Could you lay out where that stands right now? Trump has said, you know, he wants a ceasefire before Netanyahu, who is scheduled to come to Washington, D.C. next week to have a 60-day ceasefire.
Well, I'm always hesitant to comment one way or another about all of these ceasefire efforts. We've heard this for the past 21 months now, that there's a ceasefire on Christmas. There's going to be a ceasefire within the next week. There's going to be a ceasefire for Ramadan. There's going to be a ceasefire for Easter. We always hear this stuff. I think it boils down to what's the strategic benefit for the United States and the Israelis. And then you have to look to the wider region, in my opinion. Perhaps, you know, the war is getting quite costly for the Israelis in terms of the public opinion. After the 12-day war with Iran, although the Israeli polls suggested that Netanyahu's stock had gone up and his popularity had increased, the desire for the war to end in Gaza increased massively. And this was also combined with a series of operations by the Qassam brigades of Hamas that killed quite a considerable, by the Israeli standards, a number of their soldiers. And so the pressure poured in. The Israeli population overwhelmingly favors a ceasefire, and they also overwhelmingly favor, most of all, a prisoner exchange so they can continue to get the remaining Israeli prisoners that are held inside Gaza out. So there's that element. So there has to be at least theater on the Netanyahu government side to sort of quench the thirst of the Israeli population for that. But at the same time, nothing is guaranteed here. If it's going to be a 60-day ceasefire, well, we have this before. We had this phased ceasefire approach, and then Israel just broke it unilaterally. They just said, well, one day, no, we're just going to start bombing Gaza again. And it all fell to the floor. There was nothing to show for it. So the whole idea that this could hold, I don't know how there is anyone to safeguard it. What do we trust to enforce it? The Trump administration that told Iran that it was in discussions with them over the nuclear file and then greenlit an Israeli attack on Iran. The same Trump administration that said that there was a ceasefire when he came into office and then just let it fall through and allowed the Israelis. Trump has gone further than Biden. Biden at least allowed trickles of aid to come in. Trump allowed them to do a full blockade on all food and humanitarian goods for around 3 months. So it's something that to try and predict whether this will work or not is very difficult. Obviously, the people of Gaza long for it. The Israeli population now is in favor of it. But whether it will happen is another thing. And then you've got these obstacles in the way, like Itamar Ben-Gvir and Bezalel Smotrich. So even if theoretically the Israeli government, Netanyahu, wants this and he goes ahead with it, and for the next 5 months at least, he can't have a vote of no confidence against him because one just failed prior to the war on Iran. He will still have to face elections eventually. And if he loses his coalition partners, then it's going to be very difficult for him to form a coalition. And then obviously he's got his corruption trial ongoing as well.
Which was postponed. A lot of analysts think under pressure from the Trump administration, conducting foreign policy via Truth Social demanded that the Israeli government stop its witch hunt against Benjamin Netanyahu. But that's a really important consideration, seeing that he gets a lot of his power base from these far-right ministers that he's beholden to. And yeah, I did see the headline yesterday that Smotrich and Ben-Gvir might dynamic duo their way into finding a way to stop the hostage deal. Because they don't want a ceasefire. They don't even want the hostages back. Like, from their perspective, they've been the biggest political liability over the past 2 years. So, also, we can talk about ceasefires in general. I think it's very clear that the Iran-U.S. Or Israel ceasefire happened mostly because Israel was running out of interception munitions. And they don't have a very high tolerance threshold. The country itself doesn't have a lot of strategic depth in terms of tactically, like standoff distance between their front lines and their industrial centers. Their one, I don't know, securing element was this promise that the Iron Dome and that this integrated air defense system would be able to protect them. And when we talk about integrated air defense systems, like we're talking about like U.S. naval destroyers intercepting Iranian rockets in the around the Persian Gulf, then over Iraqi airspace, then the Jordanian batteries and fighters doing it as well. And then they finally get to Israel, who's also getting air defense support from Cyprus and other naval assets in the Mediterranean. And well, it didn't work. It didn't work. And so I think it was a bad PR stunt, and I can't stress how devastating it is, at least strategically, for a country like Israel, who, basically is kept safe by this idea of their deterrence capacity, their ability to defeat any military within the region. The Mossad knows what you had for breakfast. Well, that was kind of shattered during this last distance conflict with Iran. So that's why the ceasefire happened. And we were thinking of initially that they would refocus on Gaza. And this is why I mistrust any like ceasefire predictions, because based off of what we can take, like the ceasefire deal is basically just political theater. It strings people along in the same way the two-state solution strings people along. Like, we're eventually going to like fix this situation and change is going to come. Meanwhile, they're conducting their purge of the Gaza Strip under the political cover of the promise, the always elusive promise of a ceasefire.
And that's exactly it. It's political theater, because you have to please the domestic Israeli audience if you're the Israeli government. And then also there's an element of it in tricking the opposition. You want to try and trick Hamas or Hezbollah or Iran. And to that point, recently, the Washington Institute for Near East Policy held a press conference, a panel where they hosted Michael Herzog, who was the former Israeli ambassador to the United States. And something that I found very interesting about it, not only was there an admission from Herzog that the decision to strike Iran was actually taken back in November of last year, which was when he was still in office in the government. He's now since stepped down. He's not the ambassador anymore. But when he was in that position, he said that decision was made. And he also said something that was very important, I think, to this entire conversation. And I think it has a large element of truth to it. He said that Iran and Hezbollah misunderstood Israel entirely and their intentions entirely. He said, post-October 7, I'm paraphrasing him now, but this is pretty much what he said. Post-October 7, Israel is a totally different country. And their goals after October 7 was to basically crush the entirety of the Iranian-led axis of resistance. And he said this quite openly. He said the Iranians completely misread the situation, and that's what led to what we saw. And in fact, I think what we saw on the ground and the actions from both Hezbollah and the Iranians indicated that there was some sort of misreading, because they were approaching it from the standpoint of wanting this, a strategic escalation here and there and containing the situation. Whereas the Israelis viewed October 7 as an existential threat to their very existence. In fact, I've said this for a while, that Israel, what was Israel before October 7, no longer exists. There isn't an Israel today anymore. There is currently an entity which is trying to redefine itself, that cannot even define its borders at this time. It is seeking to expand in a variety of ways. It is seeking to defeat all of its opposition in the entirety of the region and crush them. It's seeking to answer the Palestinian question, both in the Gaza Strip and in the West Bank. And they want to define what sort of state they are. And these were questions which were already there under the surface and were brewing before October 7, when Netanyahu came into office with the whole judicial overhaul question and the rise of these religious nationalists that wanted to, according to the Israeli, many of the Israeli rights groups and people in the opposition, to Judaize the Israeli government. So what we're dealing with now is an Israeli government that does want total victory. I don't think it's lying when Netanyahu says total victory on his 7-front war, but I think it was interpreted wrong that this war could close. And I think the ceasefire talks and the whole posturing and throughout the Biden administration about, oh, there's going to be a ceasefire here, we're working to do this, we're working to do that, and there's guarantees, was all a ruse so that Iran would interpret this situation or continue to interpret the situation as something that could close, that this could be an end to the round of hostilities. But that's not what we saw. And in fact, when the Israelis assassinated Fouad Shukr, who was one of the heads of the Hezbollah military wing, and Ismail Haniyeh in Tehran only hours later, the response that came from Hezbollah was very, very, very limited. And I think in my own reading of it, and I'd said it at the time, I think that was the moment when Israel decided, okay, it's safe now to go ahead with the assassinations of Hezbollah's senior leadership, including Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah, and the pager attack that they had there waiting to detonate on the Lebanese people. And now, of course, they view the situation as open season to attack Iran. Going back to YNAP, and I know I've sort of harbored this point a lot, going back to YNAP, the Washington Institute for Near East Policy, if you read what they're now saying about Iran, it's very interesting. They're advocating, they're saying if negotiations fail, and the negotiations are set up to fail because the conditions are non-starters for Iran, then the US will have to use force again. That's what they're advocating for now. They're saying that there will have to be another round of strikes against Iran. And they're also saying Robert Satlow, who's a senior, let's say official at YNAP, he's one of the heads of YNAP. He said that the whole environment has changed now. It's basically the U.S. and Israeli strikes opened the way for future attacks on Iran. And so when we're talking about the Gaza ceasefire, to just round this up, I believe that if there's going to be a Gaza ceasefire, the purpose of that will be taking the Gaza front out of this war, at least temporarily, to focus on Iran. I personally don't see this war as closed. I don't think the Iranians see it as closed. The Israelis most certainly do not. So the war with Iran is ongoing. We're just in a lull where there's some, operations with drones and stuff like that inside of Iran now. Nothing major, but I believe there'll be another round in the future.
There absolutely will be another round in the future. I don't think that anybody within the defense space thought that Iranian missiles would be able to achieve that amount of target devastation. We did see kind of soft launches with Operation True Promise 2, them putting rounds on target into Netanyahu Air Force Base. But I think the Israelis underestimated the Iranian lack of restraint. We could call it that. Obviously, it was very measured. But they hit some targets, defense targets, some logistical targets, and it basically just showed that, if they really opened up this front, they could start hitting water desalination facilities, power plants, make life unlivable for the Israeli citizens, which they don't have any tolerance for austerity economies and lack of, modern amenities, unlike the Iranian people who have existed under sanctions since the revolution. That was part of it. Also, we being the United States, hadn't tested those massive ordnance penetrators out before on an actual live target. And I think they were waiting on an assessment to see what that would look like going forward if they were to repeat these strikes and dismantle the Iranian nuclear program. But this war is not over. Okay, we need to consider in the larger picture of United States regime change operations. This war is not going to be over anytime soon, because look at Libya. Look at Syria. We bombed them, kept them under sanctions for 14 years. And that is what a lot of people in these defense circles, these Iran hawk circles, are thinking. We're even within Israel itself, within their own think tank apparatus, they're talking about partition, regime collapse. If you can't change it to a pro-West, pro-NATO force, you just collapse the entire country like Libya, have it, inter-ethnic civil wars. stuff like that. So, and then Israel Katz, the defense minister, like last week said, yeah, we were trying to assassinate Khamenei, the supreme leader, but we just couldn't get to him. And when I said that on TRT World, right before the Israeli strikes, I was talking to the anchor, and he was like shocked. He's like, wait, you mean to say that the U.S. and Israel will try to take out the supreme leader? I was like, yeah. Obviously, they did a soft launch with Nasrallah, who was a civic leader. And, now they've kind of normalized it because we've proven that whatever Israel does, if you want to politically assassinate the leader of another country openly and claim credit for it, well, we can do that now. And so there was an idea with the strikes that, once they hit a few targets, killed a few leaders, that the Iranian people would rise up. And of course, like the CIA has cultivated the Iranian monarchist diaspora for decades. And so they put out all their friggin' propagandists, mobilize them to talk about regime change. But that's just it kind of backfired. And I absolutely understand the echo chamber thinking because I existed in it when I was doing like intelligence stuff in Joint Special Operations Command. When you only engage with people and ideas that reinforce what you want to believe, that, oh, yes, we can actually collapse Iran just like that, then you'll go for it. And so there was kind of an assessment, I believe, this is my own personal analysis, that a lot of these hawks who will not give up on regime collapse in Iran were kind of stunned that how unsuccessful this was.
And it shows, because if you were to read what they were saying in the think tanks, and this is why I would lean towards your assessment here. Obviously, you know better from the inside, what the thinking is there in those echo chambers. But if you read what the think tanks were writing prior to the lead up to the war, the Heritage Foundation, YNAP, Foundation for Defense of Democracies, even the Atlantic Council, but obviously the Heritage Foundation, YNAP, and FTD have more influence over Trump than they did in the Biden days, even, especially Heritage Foundation. They were all talking about Iran is on its last feet, and it's so weak, and its allies are weak, and Hezbollah is done, and all the Iranian air defenses were wiped out in Israel's small attack late last year. And they all repeat this propaganda. And then when Israel launched its attack, a few things surprised me, because I'd written about this and sort of predicted what Israel might try and do. I thought they might try and go after the IRGC leadership. I'd written about that for about a month, that they would try and do that along with the nuclear side. What I didn't predict was that they would so brazenly go after civilian areas, because the Iranian public, for one, if the Iranian government was to launch a war against Israel, that's one thing. But when Iran is attacked, there's a large appetite for retaliation, even amongst the most hardline, even Shah supporters still inside, the more prosperous areas of Tehran that exist. Even some of those types, when they saw those images, the Israeli first attack hit residential buildings. There were these photos and videos of like a toddler laying on the ground and covered in like rubble, and like a woman, a mother trapped underneath rubble with her children. These images didn't go away. And what it did is it made the Iranian public, instead of go, well, we're going to revolution now, like the deposed Shah's son says that the Iranian regime is collapsing, and apparently it collapses more and more every single day. He didn't trigger even a single protest with his calls to do a revolution. And the reason for this is clear, because they attack civilian areas, and I don't know how they believe it, but it must be these echo chambers, that they think that if you kill civilians in central Tehran, that somehow the Iranian people are going to rise up in your favor and going to listen to Netanyahu now. And because of like a large portion of the diaspora, the Iranian diaspora, hating the government and supporting the Shah, and there's also MEK supporters and stuff, that somehow represents the population inside of Iran of like 92, 93 million people throughout the country. It's just delusional. So then the surprise number one was the way the Israelis attacked, which obviously triggered this outrage amongst the Iranian population, whether they hated the government or they loved the government and were willing to die for it. They all rallied around the flag in an unprecedented way. Then you had the second big surprise, because I was speaking to a lot of people at the time, and they were like, wait for 2 to 5 days. Iran, after this strike, if it was if it was successful at taking out this decapitation strike, taking out the IRGC leadership, and what we've seen, wait for a few days, Iran's going to take a few days to get back on its feet. In 15 hours, they launched this massive attack. I didn't expect them to hit central Tel Aviv and hit the Kiryat and go after these big targets in central, because they wanted to demonstrate power. So they went after strategic targets in central Tel Aviv, where I remember watching it live on Al Mayadeen when it first happened. And I was stunned, because even like, I didn't think the Iranians would go after those sort of targets. I thought maybe they hit air bases and the likes. And then maybe they'd escalate it over a period of time to, some infrastructure targets or something like that, depending upon what Israel does. But it shocked me, like the ferocity with which Iran struck back and how quickly they struck back. Then they got their air defenses back online, all within 15 hours, and replaced all of their senior leadership, all within 15 hours. Which as somebody who was pushing back against the propaganda of Iran's air defense systems were destroyed and Iran is weak and it can't do anything and it doesn't have missiles left and all of the things that were said, I never imagined that they would hit back so hard so quickly and change the course of the battle like that. And I think it obviously came as a shock to the Israelis. I don't think they were expecting that sort of a retaliation so quickly. But just before I finish that point, at the start, when Israel first carried out its series of assassination strikes, Israeli media were talking about, citing military sources, that we achieved in Iran in 6 minutes what it took us a week to achieve with Hezbollah in Lebanon if the strikes succeeded. So evidently, if that is the thinking, to assume that those quotes were true from Israeli officials, and that was the thinking, they thought that Iran would sort of fall down in the way that Hezbollah did, or at least adopt like a very, very defensive posture and would go to crisis mode. And it didn't happen. Hezbollah is an armed group, a political party. Iran is a massive country.
Right. And one thing about the Hezbollah issue about them securing a ceasefire, they literally assassinated one guy after another until they finally encountered someone who would work with them. You're not going to be able to do that in the same way with the Iranian government at all. And
sorry, go ahead.
No, please.
I was going to say, even with Sheikh Naim Qassem, who's now the Secretary General of Hezbollah, of course, under him, they respected a ceasefire deal and they stopped fighting. But you should see his rhetoric now. His rhetoric has changed from the rhetoric of Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah was very much a strategic approach, calculated, pragmatic, diplomatic. Naim Qassem now, his language is the language of Hamas, essentially. It's a jihad of victory or martyrdom. He's talking about openly that their religious convictions tell them to liberate Palestine. And like that rhetoric, it shouldn't be ignored. And also, Hezbollah had to absorb the hit. It was a massive hit. It was devastating. And nobody can dispute that. But even though that they sat back now, and like you said, they assassinated 2 secretary generals to get to Naim Qassem, who is not prepared for the role. Even now, Hezbollah is still holds its power. It can still fight the Israelis. It still managed to defeat them from reaching the Litani River on the ground. And it will prepare for another attack. The population in southern Lebanon is distraught. The population in general obviously took a hit, but the supporters of Hezbollah now are in a completely different mind state. If you speak to the people in South Lebanon and the way that they've dealt with the martyrdom of Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah, these people are they haven't gotten over it. And they haven't gotten over the 3,000 people killed. They haven't got over the pager attacks. And they do want to fight, and they will fight. And if the Israelis seriously believe that Hezbollah is done, it's going to be a huge shock to them. It's going to be a huge shock to their system. Before October 7, they were saying Hamas was done. So that shows you where their minds are at.
This is just all too familiar. Like I've been seeing this same thinking since I was a teenager, like 19 years old in Afghanistan. And I just want to point this out to the audience, like from the Western perspective, and of course, or we could call it the NATO perspective. Israel's part of that. It's always just look at the war in Ukraine. We can defeat Russia. We just need to send Patriot batteries to the Ukrainian National Army. Oh, no, wait, that didn't work. Attackums. No, wait, now they need F-16s. We're just going to send this silver bullet and they'll be able to devastate the region, destroy our enemies. And we have another iteration of that delusional thinking. Release. Gottheimer Lawler introduced bipartisan bunker buster act to equip Israel against Iran's continued nuclear threat and to strengthen U.S. national security. So yesterday, a couple representatives introduced the bunker buster act. I hate this. It authorizes the president to support Israel's defense by providing massive ordnance penetrators or MOPs to or bunker buster bombs and the aircraft required to deploy it, which means B-2 Northrop Grumman stealth bombers. So that stock is skyrocketing right now because we're going to need to make more of them. Those things cost $1 billion. I think it's either $500 million or $1 billion per aircraft.
I saw $2 billion, but I might be wrong.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, they're expensive because they don't show up on radar. So air defenses are useless against the Spirit bombers. But to take out Iran's underground nuclear infrastructure, equipping Israel with its capability directly strengthens American national security by eliminating Iran's pathway to a nuclear weapon. Well, that's funny because today we're seeing headlines like Iran will not retaliate further for the United States punishing strikes on its nuclear program. A senior government official told NBC News on Thursday today, saying his country is open to negotiations with Washington, but Iran has no plans to stop uranium enrichment. So obviously they wouldn't. I think after Libya and Operation Midnight Hammer, I think you'd be a fool to give up your nuclear program if you're a country in the global south that resists U.S. imperialism. It's kind of a suicide mission. So this is why the war will continue. Obviously, that's where it's building to. So Iran has stepped away from the IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency, which is like one of the most spy-filled and intelligence-driven agencies on the planet. There's assertions, I can't confirm it, that the IAEA gave targeting data to the U.S. and Israel in order to, target their nuclear program and nuclear scientists. Anyways, so basically the whole IAEA thing is a trap. It's a trap for Iran. So Iran says, no, we're not going to work with this agency anymore. Therefore, you can't have inspectors. And then the IAEA is going to turn around and say, this is a rogue actor. It's a rogue nation. It just feeds into the propaganda machine that we need to send Israel B-2 Spirit bombers, and the U.S. needs to get more directly involved. And we're just going to see a ramp up of this multi-year sustained propaganda about the Iranian nuclear program and why they need regime change and regime collapse. So this is not ending anytime soon.
And this has never been about Iran pursuing nuclear weapons, because if they wanted to stop that, they had the JCPOA. And the IAEA said Iran was adhering to all of its commitments, even after the Trump administration withdrew. So obviously now the IAEA, it's another story to get into, has a different perspective and a different leadership. But if we look at the course of the propaganda against Iran, it's very clear. They don't just have a conversation about their nuclear program when they're talking about nukes. They talk about Iran's missile program, its drone program, and most of all, its allies. So Hamas, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, the PFLP, etc., the Palestinian groups.
Expand, and if they really want to get crazy, they can expand it into Russia as well.
Yeah, this is the thing. They are focused. They hate Iran because Iran, number one, it pursues its own independent policies, right? It's an independent country, and it wants to clear the region from U.S. imperialism. It wants to be outside that grip. And number two, it supports the Palestinians. That's it. That's the reason why they hate them and they oppose them. Pakistan has a nuclear weapon. That its neighbors literally have a nuclear weapon, and they're a Muslim country, right? Because they're like, oh, these Muslims can't have a nuclear weapon and all of that. Their propaganda, because us Muslims are so barbaric and not civilized, we can't have a nuclear weapon. So they say all this stuff about nuclear weapons. Ultimately, it's not about that, because if it was about nuclear weapons, they wouldn't have done any of these strikes. Because all this does is encourages Iran further. If you're Iran right now, anyone rational, even a lot of people in the West who are looking at this, who don't even know too much about the situation, would understand why Iran now would want to achieve a nuclear weapon, especially as well with what the United States and Israel did with the collapse of the UN system and the collapse of international law with their strikes. Because obviously there's a buildup to this through the 21 months of genocide. But when Israel attacked, and then afterwards the United States attacked Iran, it was a clear violation of the UN Charter. But unlike Kofi Annan, who in 2003, when the US invaded Iraq, said that the US violated the UN Charter, and there was a big debate, and obviously this was something held up by the anti-war movement, which was massive at the time. They had this big debate over, well, we got one UN Security Council resolution condemning Iraq, but there wasn't a follow-up Security Council resolution which endorsed military action. So therefore, there was this big discussion and there was a lot of condemnation about the war being illegal. This time around, what has Antonio Guterres said about the violation of the UN Charter by the Israelis or the Americans? He condemned the Iranian retaliatory strike on CENTCOM in Qatar with the same veracity as his, with the same passion and the same rhetoric as he used to condemn so-called, in a moderate way, and express concern over the Israeli and US attacks on Iran. So the whole UN system has collapsed. And I mean, this adds, it's the final nail in the coffin, but this adds to the fact we were talking before, and you mentioned how you were speaking on TRT about the assassination of Ayatollah Khamenei, and you thought that could happen. Well, with Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah, just as an example, when they assassinated him, they killed 300 civilians to kill him, and they blew up a whole block, essentially. Mm-hmm. If you go back to the early 2000s, and by the way, Biden endorsed it, Biden celebrated it, and the media celebrated it. If you go back to the early 2000s, when Israel assassinated the head of Hamas, one of the founders of Hamas, Sheikh Ahmed Yassin, I believe they killed 9 civilians when they killed him. Right?
And Bush actually made a statement, and he was furious.
He condemned it. Yeah. He said that you can't do something like this. You can't just kill civilians in an area and strike somebody. You need to have a legal process. So even the Bush administration, which committed an illegal invasion of Iraq, which back then the UN would condemn the US for violations of the UN Charter, and even the United States government would care somewhat about, going and trying to get those votes at the UN Security Council. They would care about, how this looks on the international stage if we kill a leader without any due process and we just carry out these sort of attacks. They don't care anymore. Look at the pager attack. Every single person that you see talk about the pager attack in Lebanon, you go on, it was a wonderful operation. What about the security of global supply chains? What about the fact that the vast majority of people that were injured were civilians? What about the fact that they killed women and children? This was an indiscriminate attack. It wasn't targeted. It was indiscriminate. But that doesn't matter anymore. None of it matters. The whole system has collapsed. They just do whatever they want in Gaza. Humanitarian international law, it's gone. All the human rights organizations, the ICJ, the ICC, every organ of the United Nations, all they do now is influence public opinion. Other than that, they don't hold any weight.
Yeah. We were warning about this in November 2023 when they started bombing hospitals as a state policy. It's like once you open this can of worms, this is it's Pandora's box. This is the logical conclusion. And so one thing I did want to talk about that you brought up real quick was Pakistan. And when we talk about political theater, I know there is some confusion over people wondering why Pakistan would submit Donald Trump for the Nobel Peace Prize 2 days before he bombed Iran. Well, don't pay attention to the political theater. Okay, we've had Israeli military officials, messianic Zionists, call for hey, after we get done with Iran's nuclear program, Pakistan's next, and we need to talk. We can talk about the increasing security relationship between the Zionist entity, and the Hindu fascist government in India. Also with strong regional ambitions to collapse Pakistan's nuclear program, preferably Pakistan itself. So yeah, Pakistan's going to get more involved. Obviously, Iran sources. China sources a lot of its energy consumption from Iran because it's under sanctions and they can buy cheaper oil from Iran. So they've basically pivoted in their global infrastructure plan from using the Iranian shadow fleet to ship fuel to China to an actual rail system from the Khorasan into the Chinese heartland. So that's continuing. Russia, of course, just signed a 20-year security compact with Iran as well. So they're trying to portray in the propaganda space that it's this completely isolated country. And while I'm one of those people who doesn't really think that like BRICS is ever really going to, at least at its current iteration, is ever really going to present a united front against, you know, Western hegemony. I mean, these are still undeniable things. Like we've had this narrative that it's this post-revolutionary state about to collapse, but it's looking pretty steadfast right now.
Well, even a lot of people were trying to compare Iran to Syria. And the comparison is just like, it's not even worth entertaining, but just to, you know, summarize, Iran, like the system in Iran is completely different from Syria. Syria, basically, because of the sanctions in large part, and also corruption, it deteriorated to such a point where all the state institutions were weak. The economic situation was atrocious. It didn't really have full sovereignty at that point as well. Like, it was very difficult for it. A lot of the money that would come in was embezzled. And it was weak on every single front. And it just took a push. And in the end, what happened with the Syrian government is that there wasn't even a fight. You know, the groups in Idlib, led by Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, simply just waltzed into Damascus, essentially. And the Russians airlifted Assad out. Obviously, I'm summarizing, and there's a lot more that went into that. But the Iranian situation is not like that. I mean, in Iran, we're talking about the IRGC, the Iranian army, the Basij, and then all the others that would join as well. There's a reason why during the Iran-Iraq war, they could absorb 1 million casualties and continue fighting. They could absorb chemical weapons attacks and attacks on oil infrastructure. And they kept on fighting, and they kept going. You know, they're not easy to just collapse. And also, Iran is a huge territory, even if there's some, you know, there's an invasion across the Iraqi border or something like this. There's rooms for them to make mistakes. There's room for them to make mistakes on the ground. And also, they've been carrying out these massive months-long drills, counterinsurgency drills, and drills to combat hybrid warfare attacks. Like just before all of this happened as well, which were coordinated between the IRGC and the regular army. The idea that it's just going to collapse, I think, is pretty ludicrous. Even if they assassinated Khamenei, I can't see it happening. Yeah, it will be a symbolic blow for sure, but he'll be replaced. And then Iran will come with a vengeance, and so will the entire Shia world come with a vengeance for what was done. And this is a thing as well that in the calculations here with collapsing a nation like Iran, what they did with Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah will come back to bite them. It will. And they think, oh, it's wonderful, we just took out this guy. He's not just a guy to the Lebanese population, to especially the Shia. But he's not just some leader. No, this man was what kept their life going at different points. He is their very breath. It's hard to put into words what Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah meant to the Shia population in South Lebanon or in throughout Lebanon. You can't put it into words. And the idea that this is just going to go and there's going to be nothing in the future, no retaliation, Hezbollah is just going to sit back and it's just going to disarm because the US tells it to, is ludicrous. And in Iran's case, it's not just the Shia population. It's not just the groups that it supports. It's not just its own military forces and paramilitary forces in the country. We're talking about Russia is not going to allow Iran to collapse. That's a terrible idea to allow Iran to collapse. China doesn't want Iran to collapse. Pakistan cannot afford for Iran to collapse. As much as it allies itself with the United States here, this is a death sentence to Pakistan if Iran was to collapse. Even mass instability, if the whole country was destabilized, that is terrible, especially along its border area with these Baluchi nationalists there and these different militant groups, many of which, of course, are backed secretly
by India in the United States. Yeah, and that's one thing I did want to talk about, like that, about the degrading global security situation. Now, because Pakistan, remember, its nuclear program was about one thing: India, the regional nuclear program. But now after this, we've seen their foreign come out of their foreign ministry that they're developing an ICBM delivery system so they can have deterrence against Western nations, because our foreign policy is so ideological and rabid right now. They'd be insane not to, especially in conjunction with statements coming out of Israel about how after Iran, Pakistan's next. So, of course, there are different factions within Pakistan, within the Pakistani military, with the Rawalpindi generals and the Inter Services Intelligence Directorate. That some are more U.S., some are like really anti-U.S., but this is like bringing a lot of these things together because, like, national survival. After Libya, Syria, what they want to do to Iran, and then saying they're next. So, yeah, and I think we're just going to see massive nuclear proliferation going forward. So that's fun. Welcome to 2025.
And that's a result of this. And there's no pushback. I don't see the pushback. Even the anti-war movement is not the same as it was in the build-up to the Iraq War. It was quite disheartening to a certain extent to see that the protests against the war with Iran were not actually that large. Obviously, it wasn't the same build-up and everything. The Palestine protests are quite large. But, it speaks to the fact that it's just become normalized for you to go and attack another country without a justification. They say a preemptive strike. Okay, what justifies a preemptive strike? There was no information presented. This is even worse than the lies about the Iraq in the build-up to the Iraq War.
Yeah, at least they had the decency to send Colin Powell to lie to the UN Security Council and take that vial of yellow cake.
But there's none of that. They don't even bother with it anymore. They don't bother with something like that, even the performative element of it. They just went ahead and did it. And that was the shocking thing. But I suppose after what they got away with in Gaza, and they continue to get away with in Gaza, anything's it's the law of the jungle. You just do whatever you want. And what I think is so horrifying about it is this UN system and international law and all of this and human rights. This was all as a result of the atrocities committed, most of them by the Nazis, but also by the United States and Britain and others during the Second World War. It was a response to that. And it was supposed to be to implement a system which would prevent these sort of things from happening again. So now we're in such a situation where all of it is happening in front of our eyes, and these systems and institutions that have been built supposedly to safeguard the world from these sort of things happening, or at least escalating and getting worse, have failed, and they're being ignored and undermined. So it's might makes right. Who has the power? And that really comes down to, if you want to look at the situation with Gaza, with the regional war and the Israelis versus Iran, you have to look at it. Well, this is leading to a military solution. There's what diplomatic solution is there? There's none. I cannot see a diplomatic solution, even if they quiet down different fronts at different times, which they've been doing. Where's the diplomatic solution? There's none.
There is none, because you'd have to be a fool to trust U.S. diplomacy at this point. Like the whole farce of the Iranian nuclear talks going into the 6th round of negotiations was to lull their entire defense apparatus into a false sense of security so that Israel can conduct its stupid little decapitation strikes. Same thing happened with Nasrallah when the U.S. Special Envoy to Lebanon was getting involved with the Israel-Hezbollah ceasefire talks. diplomacy used as deception as a mechanism of assassination. That's what anyone with a brain thinks now when it comes to U.S. diplomacy, especially in the area of U.S. Central Command, which stretches from Egypt all the way to India. So, I think also what is being passed in terms of policy underscores the fact that, we're not really interested in negotiations. Why would a bill be put forth yesterday when the U.S. is purportedly trying to get Iran back to the nuclear negotiating table? Do you have bipartisan senators passing a bill, which will pass most likely, to send B-2 Spirit bombers so Iran could do it, so Israel can do what we did to Iran directly?
This is it. Like, it's all in the way of escalation. Again, to try and find any route to a diplomatic solution doesn't make sense if you're the Iranians right now, you're Hezbollah, Hamas, etc. And they've adopted this view now because it's been forced upon them that this is an existential war. This is a regional existential war. And all these groups, if you talk to them, before I have contacts, I used to speak to them and they were like, oh, maybe there's going to be ceasefire this time. And they would make these sort of comments when I'd interview. And now the rhetoric has shifted to this is an existential war. We won't accept a ceasefire, which is capitulation. And this is going to go on for some time. That is the sort of thinking that they have right now. So it will end up in an escalation. And like you said, they talk about diplomacy, but then something like sending B-2 bombers to the Israel, it's only going to escalate the situation. The big question here is, do the Israelis believe that they can topple the Iranian government and survive? That's the big question mark for me. If you were to try and do that and it looks like it's about to happen, are Hezbollah just going to sit there? And then once Hezbollah enters from the north and you can't stop them, then what about Hamas? Because honestly, on the ground, the Israelis are incapable of defending themselves. They have an air force, they have very sophisticated intelligence agencies. But on the ground, there's a reason October 7 was so successful. And they cannot defend themselves. They can't. They're incapable. So do they think that somehow that they can win? If there's a multi-front attack on them, I think it would wipe them.
Yeah. Factor in like the popular mobilization units in Iraq, and then
though, I think if Hezbollah and Hamas attacked at the same time and Iran had taken out a lot of the air bases or grounded the Israeli Air Force to a significant degree, I think they'd take Jerusalem. And I know that seems very extreme, and a lot of people would push back and, it's not that easy. I honestly can't see how the Israelis would stop it. Hezbollah has a force of around 100,000 people. It can garner a lot more. Once it starts coming over the border, God knows what happens.
Every 18-year-old in the south of Lebanon who's pissed off, who lost family members, is going to join up, just like 18-year-olds throughout history do.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Once you start something like that, how do you stop it? The only way I could see the Israelis surviving it is the Jordanian, the Egyptian military coming in to literally physically stop it, because Hezbollah and Hamas wouldn't attack them. They would be able to stop it and then get some diplomatic solution. But this is the issue, that they're playing with fire here and they keep escalating. And it's not even in the Israeli interest, because the more you escalate, the worse it gets for you. And then what are you going to do? Use nuclear weapons against Iran? That's not going to save you from a Hezbollah offensive. That's not going to save you even if certain groups in Syria saw that happening. There would be people just in Daraa and other areas who would grab their rifles and head over into the Jolan, because that's the sort of thing that would happen in that scenario. And this is the thing with them. Maybe they want to try and close the Gaza front because they think, if there's going to be a big war and just Hezbollah and Iran, Hezbollah will be calculated and it won't do anything. But you're depending and you're making assumptions now, and you're depending upon assumptions, and everything they're doing, including the attack on Iran, was depending upon a wide array of assumptions about Iran, which you can't base, such drastic actions, which could lead to a nation-killing event, on these assumptions. But they do, because they believe their propaganda. And the reality is now, the people of the region, despite the fact that you might not see, significant action from Egyptians or Jordanians, and the Syrian government is now in normalization talks with them, the people there hate Israel. The people there want to resist. The Lebanese are not going to stop resisting. The Palestinians will never stop resisting. They've traumatized an entire generation. Gaza right now, what are those people going to do for the rest of their lives? Let's even assume, which I don't think will happen, that they can ethnically cleanse the whole population of Gaza into Sinai and into Jordan. Let's say they think they can get away with that. What are those traumatized young people going to do when they get there? It's obvious what they're going to do. What any human being would do after their whole families are wiped out. And I can tell you, as somebody that's married to a Palestinian from Gaza, so I see the Palestinian community, and of course I have a lot of colleagues there, a lot of friends. I've lost a lot of friends. Everyone has lost not one family member, not just a father, not just a brother, not just a child or cousins. They've lost 20, 30, 100 members of their family and extended family. But all of them. And the idea that you can just do this to a population, and then you're somehow going to, expand your borders and expand your Abraham Accords with everyone and get away with it? It's obvious what's going to happen. People are going to resist, even if the Israelis won total victory in their, their Seven Front War, which I don't believe will happen. In the long term, if they're still there and they're still behaving in the way they are, if they keep things as they are, even if they have their full victory, eventually, what do you think is going to happen? All of these groups, like before, in 1967, when Nasser and Arab nationalism was defeated and they thought they won against the Arabs and won against the resistance, or when the PLO was kicked out of first Jordan and then they kicked them to Tunisia, they thought the PLO is done. They thought after Camp David that the Egyptians are out and the Syrians are never going to do anything to us again. Every single time they make these assumptions and they think we won. But all you do is piss the people off more and more and more and give generation after generation more reason to fight you because you took everything from them. And then they destroyed the entire region, along with the United States, of course. They destroyed the entire region. These people don't have normal countries anymore. Syria, they say a lot of people are happy about Syria. Okay, Bashar is gone. They're not happy about the economic situation in Syria. They're not happy about the prospects in Syria. Syria is still a war-torn country that is in the floor, controlled by a vast array of militia groups across the country. Lebanon, look at what happened with its civil war. Look at what happened to it economically today, the corruption, everything that's going on. The entire region is bleeding. We don't have to mention Iraq. We don't have to talk about Libya. We just have to talk about all of the surrounding nations. The Jordanians who normalized, the Egyptians who normalized, their countries are going down economically, especially Egypt. So these people, what you have done to them by attacking and they only understand the language of force, you've inspired generations and generations to want to fight you. And they're not going to go away because they're indigenous to their countries. They're indigenous to the land. They've got nowhere else to go. Some of them might go to another place and pursue, higher education or whatever if they have the opportunity to do it and get jobs elsewhere. But the vast majority are staying there and they're not going to go. And even if you achieve everything you think you can, they're still going to fight you. And even if you kill the resistance for now, let's say you completely defeated it, it will rise again in 5 to 10 years time, and it will come back in another form with a different ideology perhaps and smash you again. And it will just keep going until you are defeated. If you keep that mentality, you cannot sustain that.
Yeah, I had a controversial take that I got a lot of hate over 2 years ago when I made the comment, look, if you're going to do this stuff and be an occupation, you're going to catch heat rounds until you literally either have an equitable society or you kill every last person that could potentially resist. And obviously that can't be done. And one of the striking things about the U.S. torching the UN Charter and the law of land warfare and all of these international institutions that, yes, we wanted to prevent the atrocities of World War II from ever happening again. Thanks, Canadian Air Force, by the way. But they're also crafted to project U.S. hegemony across the globe. and we're slashing these institutions, and so dies our soft power, and the power to co-opt rather than coerce. And it's just, we don't have the same power projection that we used to have. And with the domestic front, I mean, one of the frustrating things is the U.S. citizens' capacity to just not care about foreign policy issues. That's why the Iran protests, counter protests, were so small. People would be like, "Oh, another foreign war. What are you gonna do? It's the Middle East. These people have been killing each other for thousands of years." Not true, by the way, but I think one of the things that's going to really cut down on the U.S.'s ability to wage imperial war is the degrading material conditions on the domestic front. If the big beautiful bill passes, it may have already passed by the time we're recording. ICE is going to be one of the largest militaries on the planet. And so when we accuse Trump of being a fascism and an imperialist, well, fascism is imperialism turned in on itself. So yeah, there's going to be a war on the home front, wars abroad, and the U.S. empire, while it's dying, it probably still has a lot of inertia left, and it's going to be very violent before the end. So I would expect Iran to kick off, maybe a wider regional war, definitely a war on our own population, starting with migrants, which is how it always starts, and starts rolling its way up the privilege ladder until it gets to any sort of political dissidence. So yeah, more to follow, more insanity, more ideological decision making, a lot of people existing in wishful thinking defense hawk echo chambers, and it's only going to get worse.
And this is the thing, people, they don't connect foreign policy to their lives, but there's a reason why everyone is struggling economically now, and young people don't have a future anymore. And it's not immigrants, but that's what they want you to think. Oh, well, there must be a correlation between all these people that look different to you coming into the country and your economic situation getting worse. And because, a lot of people don't want to look into anything, they think, oh yeah, that makes sense. So they just buy that. But it's like, well, you're not looking into anything. Like, if you think it's disconnected from what you're doing overseas, it's directly correlated. Everything that's happening, all of the things they experiment with in terms of the technology over there, as well, that they're using even in Gaza. The same technology that's being used in Gaza is being used back home in the United States against U.S. citizens. And you mentioned ICE. The same companies are investing, and they're testing it on Palestinians, and then they're using it on you too. And sometimes they test it in foreign countries, and then they bring it home to make money off of you. But ultimately, to think that you're disconnected from families in Gaza in the way that people think they are is ludicrous. It's your taxpayer dollars that are funding it. It's your government that is doing it. It's your project, and it's against you as well. Because if you want to speak up in the United States or in Britain or in Germany or France or wherever else you are, if you want to speak up and do something using your free speech rights, then you're going to be thrown in jail, you're going to be censored, you're going to be attacked, you're going to be ostracized from society, you can't get certain jobs anymore. Your life is going to be destroyed. If you're Palestine Action, you want to spray some red paint on some weapons, on some weapons manufacturers.
Terrorism.
You're a terrorist. You're a terrorist for spraying red paint and smashing the window of companies that are supplying weapons to a genocide. And the idea that they just stop with that, they stop with Palestine Action in the UK. They won't stop with prescribing Palestine Action, and they will prescribe other groups, other or activist groups and organizations, climate activists. They might go to the right wing as well. They'll sanction. They'll ban them. And then this is right and left. If you do anything that the government is going to threaten you with, it's not about a right or left thing here. Anything that threatens them in any way, then you're going to get hit with this. And that's the problem that I think people don't understand. It's like Palantir doesn't just operate, in conjunction with the Israelis to create kill lists for Palestinians. It's targeting U.S. citizens too. So the whole idea that you can separate the two, we don't live in that sort of world. Like, this is a globalized system. Like the idea that you're somehow disconnected from it and that your economic situation is disconnected from where the oil is at and your weapons companies and contract, it doesn't make any sense. But, people still begin. I think the younger generation, in my opinion, are more open to hearing this because of the fact that they don't have the same prospects as the generations before them. So they know that, their life is not going to be the same. The idea that you can just work a factory job now and you can have a nice big house and 2 cars and, you can have 2 holidays or a nice holiday a year. You can have a family on that salary and all of that. That's gone. That's not coming back. And they're not going to do anything for you. And that's not because of immigrants. That's because your government doesn't care about you. And they're working with all of these tech firms and weapons manufacturers and big corporations, not only to destroy the lives of people in Gaza or Iran, but also their own population. They exploit you too. That's the system. This is the end stage capitalism. This is what they're seeking to do, and this has always been the project. So it's just to plunder while things are still plunderable and come hell or high water. So that's where we're at right now. So, of course, again, we'll continue to monitor the Iran developments. The Gaza genocide will continue in the meantime. We'll see if a ceasefire is put in place. I suspect that, there'll be a ceasefire, then they'll gin up some excuse why Hamas broke it or didn't accept it, even though the entire ceasefire deal is a poison pill. It's kind of a non-starter based off how it's sketched out right now, just like the Iranian nuclear negotiations. So the mask is off at this point. No soft power left. Only force and the leveraging of U.S. economic and military power. So that's what we're looking forward to, guys. And thanks so much for coming on, Robert Inlakesh, staff writer here at Mint Press News, to kind of do just a regional roundtable for what's going on. Really appreciate you coming on. Thank you. Thanks for having me. Always a pleasure.
All right, y'all. And if you are in Chicago, we're doing a Palestine benefit show at Beat Kitchen. All proceeds going to Palestine Children Relief Fund and for legal defense fees for some of the homies hit with charges trying to stop a genocide. So swing on by if you're in Chicago on Friday. It's 4th of July. So cheers, y'all, and we will see you next Monday.